My manager thought firing me at 2:17 a.m. was the end of his problem. He watched me pack my box in silence, a smug look on his face. He didn't know that I wasn't just taking my personal effects. I was taking the one thing holding his entire world together. My name is Harper Lang. For 9 years, I was a ghost in the machine at VeritySync. Not a malevolent one, but a necessary one. As a compliance strategist, I was the architect of the invisible structures that kept the company safe, the digital cartographer who mapped the treacherous landscapes of international data law. I built the fences and wrote the warnings. I was 38 years old, and I knew the company's skeletal code better than I knew my own reflection. That was before I was exiled to the graveyard shift. It wasn't a formal reassignment. There was no HR meeting, no paperwork, just a silent, brutal change to the schedule system one Tuesday, shunting me from the strategic daylight hours to the desolate hum of the office between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The reason was an email, a single, professionally worded email I had sent to my direct supervisor, Jared Benson, and a few senior partners. I'd flagged a critical oversight in our risk management protocols for a new batch of European client data. It was a billion-dollar vulnerability disguised as a minor software patch, a gaping wound papered over with corporate jargon. I wasn't being an alarmist. I was doing my job, the job they paid me for. The response was silence. Then, the schedule change. Jared, a man who wore his ambition like an ill-fitting suit, began to look straight through me. In the one team meeting I was able to attend via video call, my pixelated face floating on the conference room monitor. He'd cut me off mid-sentence. "We'll circle back to the legacy concerns later. Harper," he'd said, a smirk playing on his lips. When I tried to ask him about my new hours in the hallway, he gave a short, derisive laugh. "You wanted to focus on the deep system architecture, didn't you? Well, the system is quietest at night." He walked away, leaving me standing under the flickering fluorescent lights of a world I no longer belonged to. So I adapted. I worked in the quiet. I watched the city lights glitter and die from my desk on the 42nd floor, a solitary sentinel in a glass tower. The silence didn't bother me. It helped me think. I saw the cracks in VeritySync's foundation even more clearly. I saw the shortcuts Jared was taking, the compliance checks he was disabling to push his projects through faster. I documented it all, meticulously, as was my nature. I sent polite, professional follow-ups, inquiries about the lack of transparency, the unilateral changes, the unaddressed risks. Each email was a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. I never heard a splash. Tonight was no different. The office was a morgue of empty cubicles. The only sounds were the whir of the servers and the soft click of my keyboard. I had just sent another follow-up, a final attempt to get a formal response regarding the glaring compliance gaps that were being ignored. My finger hovered over the mouse, the sent notification glowing for a moment before fading. I took a sip of my cold coffee. At 2:17 a.m., a new email chimed in my inbox. The sender was Jared Benson. The subject line was empty. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. 9 years of service had been reduced to this cold, digital execution. I felt a strange, chilling calm settle over me. I opened it. The body contained just a few words, a direct reply to my inquiry about procedure and transparency. "You complained about your shift, pack your things." I read the sentence twice. It was so perfectly him, arrogant, dismissive, and utterly stupid. He thought he was swatting a fly. He thought he was plugging a leak. He had no idea he had just handed me the detonator. When I stood up from my desk, the cavernous office was silent. The city slept outside the vast windows. No one noticed. There was no one there to notice. And in that perfect, sterile silence, I understood exactly what I had to do. I didn't reply to Jared's email. I simply moved it to a secure folder. Then, I stood up and retrieved the standard issue cardboard box from the supply closet, the one they give you on your first day and your last. My movements were unhurried, deliberate. There was no theatrical display of shock or rage. The time for emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. This was a matter of procedure. My procedure. I packed my desk with the detached precision of an archaeologist cataloging a dig site. The chipped coffee mug with the faded Verity Sync logo, a small, framed photo of a windswept coastline I'd visited years ago, a well-worn copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Each item went into the box, nestled between a few spare notebooks and a collection of fine-tipped pens. Anyone watching would have seen a compliant, defeated employee following her final terse instruction. But my hands were just going through the motions. My mind was somewhere else entirely, deep inside the company's digital fortress, a fortress I had designed. I sat back down, the half-filled box beside me. I pulled my laptop closer. I didn't delete a single file. Vandalism is for amateurs. A messy, emotional act. My work was clean, for years. As I built and refined Verity Sync's compliance architecture, I had done something no one had asked me to do, and no one had ever noticed. I hadn't just built the castle. I'd built a secret door. It wasn't a back door in the traditional sense, no illicit code or vulnerability. It was a feature, not a bug, a layer of administrative privilege, woven so deeply into the system's foundational logic that it was invisible to standard audits. It was attached to a dormant technical account, a digital ghost from a long-forgotten merger, a name that hadn't been associated with a living employee for over a decade. It was my key, and only I knew which lock it fit. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the soft clicks echoing in the empty office. I authenticated through the ghost account. The interface that bloomed on my screen was not the sanitized, user-friendly dashboard that Jared and his ilk saw. This was the core, the raw, unfiltered guts of Verity Sync, Verity Core. From here, I could see everything, every action, every query, every deleted file, every restricted document. The system's memory was perfect, and I had just unlocked it. I initiated the export. It wasn't a simple drag and drop. It was a complex query I had designed for this exact contingency. I wasn't just downloading files. I was pulling the entire institutional history. The complete, unredacted audit trail for the past 5 years. Every keystroke logged. Every access request granted or denied. All metadata related to client data transfers, particularly those that Jared had flagged as low priority for compliance review. The complete flow schemas of the data architecture, including the original, safer versions that had been overwritten by his streamlined updates. And the crown jewels, a dozen risk matrix reports, meticulously researched and written by me, that had been flagged as too conservative by senior leadership and buried before they could ever see the light of a board meeting. These were the documents that proved they knew. They had always known. The progress bar filled steadily, a silent green line representing years of corporate negligence being siphoned onto a series of encrypted, layered drives. It was the digital equivalent of taking the building's original blueprints, the electrical schematics, and the master key. They thought they were just firing a compliance officer. They had no idea they were evicting their own conscience, and that it was taking all the receipts with it. The export completed, I verified the package integrity, disconnected the drives, and placed them in my handbag, nestled safely beside my wallet. I looked at the screen one last time, the raw code of Verity Core glowing back at me. Then, I gently closed the lid of my laptop, but I didn't shut the system down. I didn't log out. The ghost was still in the machine, and its work was just beginning. Jared moved faster than I expected, but with all the finesse of a sledgehammer, by 9 a.m. the next morning, my corporate identity had been systematically garroted. My access to the company servers was severed. My email account was deactivated. My name, H. Lang, which had been tagged as an author or primary stakeholder on thousands of internal documents, was now just dead text, an unclickable string of characters. From his desk on the 42nd floor, Jared Benson performed a digital exorcism, and he was a butcher, not a surgeon. He thought he was wiping me from existence. He was pruning the branches, oblivious to the roots. What Jared, in his managerial hubris, didn't know what no one but the original CTO and I knew was that the core compliance architecture I had built wasn't just on the main servers. It existed on a mirrored, off-grid subsystem. It was designed as a catastrophic failure failsafe, a deep-level backup that updated in asynchronous packets, designed to preserve the company's legal integrity in the event of a critical data center collapse. It was expensive, esoteric, and so deeply embedded that it never appeared on standard IT audits. They paid for it every year, but had long since forgotten why. Jared was scrubbing a whiteboard, not realizing I had etched the formulas into the glass. My Ghost account was native to that subsystem. It couldn't be deleted from the surface. The silence from my former colleagues was absolute. It was a digital shunning. A few I had considered friends sent texts vague, cowardly things like, "Heard what happened. So sorry. Keep your head up." But no one from my team reached out. No one from legal. Their names on the internal messaging system turned gray in my contact list. One by one. They were protecting their jobs, their mortgages, their comfortable routines. They were choosing silence. I didn't blame them. I just documented it. The final indignity arrived that afternoon, an automated email from Human Resources, a masterpiece of corporate detachment. "Dear employee name," it began. It contained a generic exit checklist of tasks I could no longer perform, like returning a security badge I no longer had and clearing my desk I had already cleared. The link to the mandatory online exit interview portal led, poetically, to a 404 error page. They had erased me so thoroughly, they had broken their own off-boarding process. I remained silent. I didn't call HR. I didn't email Jared's boss. I spent 2 days in my apartment, watching the data I'd exfiltrated organize itself on my own secure server. It was a monument to their carelessness, a library of their sins, but data, on its own, is useless. It needs a reader. It needs a fulcrum inside the company, someone with the right access and the right curiosity. I found her in the employee directory before they had fully scrubbed my legacy access. Zoe Kassir. She'd been a legal intern the summer before, a quiet, ferociously intelligent young woman who asked all the right questions. I'd seen the promotion announcement a few weeks ago. She was now a junior contract coordinator. A minor role, but a crucial one. She would have access to the client-facing compliance modules. She would be one of the first people to see the cracks when they started to appear. And she was new enough to not be cynical, new enough to still believe in the rules. I chose the first package carefully. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a map, a heavily encrypted file containing the original, fully annotated schema for the European Data Compliance Module, the very thing I had warned Jared about. I attached it to an email from a new, anonymous Proton account. The subject line was innocuous reference material. The body of the email contained a single, unsigned sentence. Found this on an old shared drive, thought it might be useful for the new client onboarding. I hit send. The package was away. Zoe Kassir, a woman I had spoken to maybe 3 times, now had a key. She had no idea what it unlocked, or that the door even existed, but I knew her type. She was a puzzle solver, and I had just handed her a piece that didn't fit the picture she was being shown. All I had to do now was wait for her to notice. I waited 3 days. It was long enough for the anonymous email to become a nagging curiosity, a file sitting on her desktop that didn't quite make sense. Then, I sent a second email, this time from my personal, public account. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Anonymity had served its purpose. Now I needed to be a person. The subject was simple. Quick question, Zoe. Hi, Zoe, I wrote. Hope you're settling in well. This might be a strange question, but I was thinking about the quarterly review cycle. Has the data residency license for the Q4 German client data been fully recertified? Yet I remember there was a tricky clause in their original master service agreement. All the best. Harper Lang. I was laying digital breadcrumbs. I wasn't asking if she'd seen the file I sent. I was directing her to a specific corner of the system where the absence of that file's logic would be most apparent. I was giving her a reason to look. Zoe replied within the hour. Her response was cautious, professional. Hi, Harper. Thanks for reaching out. I'll check on that. I wasn't aware of any specific issues with the Q4 German certification. The hook was set. I knew she wouldn't just check on that. She would dig. People like Zoe don't leave loose threads. A day later, another email arrived from my anonymous Proton account. The subject, another thought. The message, did you notice any submodules related to jurisdictional fallbacks go missing after the last system-wide deployment? Now I was giving her a pattern. First a specific problem, now a potential systemic cause. I was teaching her how to see what was hidden in plain sight. The real work was happening inside VeritySync's walls. I couldn't see it, but I could imagine it perfectly. I pictured Zoe, her brow furrowed, running a search for the German client's MSA. I saw her cross-referencing it with the current compliance dashboard, the one Jared had streamlined. I saw the moment of confusion when the tricky clause I mentioned had no corresponding check-in in the active system. Her curiosity, now ignited, would have driven her to the permission logs. She would have searched for my name, and she would have found the graveyard. Document after document, protocol after protocol. 58 of the most sensitive compliance and architecture files in the company's history, all with a single, damning audit log entry. Permissions for H. Lang revoked by J. Benson. And next to my name, where it once read author, there was now just a blank space, a void, an intentional erasure. That's when I sent the final piece, the old risk schema. I'd already sent anonymously, I sent it again, this time to her personal email. Decrypted. Zoe, I wrote, this is the final, board-approved risk schema for European data handling from my tenure. If this structure, specifically the fallback conditions in Section 3, is no longer in the live system, your European client contracts are likely in material breach. Be careful. This was no longer a hint. It was a flare in the dark. I knew what she would be doing now. She would have both schemas open on her dual monitors, the old and the new, my version and Jared's. On one screen would be my work, clear, precise, built on a foundation of unforgiving logic, with fallback conditions for every conceivable failure. It was a document designed to protect the company. On the other screen would be Jared's version, a hollowed-out imitation. The logging hooks that would have triggered alarms were gone. The fallback conditions that would have rerouted data legally during a server error were deleted. The clear, stark language of risk had been replaced with beautifully vague corporate jargon. Synergistic data optimization. Proactive jurisdictional alignment. It was a masterpiece of plausible deniability. A meticulously crafted lie, written in the language of the boardroom. Zoe Kassir was now standing at the edge of the rabbit hole. She had the map. She could see the company's exposure, and she knew who had engineered it. The seed I had planted was no longer dormant. It had broken through the tile. The first domino was pushed by the marketing department, an all-hands email, bursting with exclamation points and corporate self-congratulation, announced the signing of 2 major new clients. One was a Parisian luxury brand conglomerate, the other a Singaporean fintech giant. The projected revenue numbers were staggering. I read the email from my couch, a cold smile touching my lips. France, Singapore, 2 of the most draconian data privacy jurisdictions on the planet. They had just gleefully sprinted into a minefield, armed with Jared Benson's hand-drawn map. I didn't leave. They were digging their own hole. I gave it a month, for 30 days. The machine ground on, blissfully unaware of the cancers growing in its code. Then, the tremors began. They started as whispers on the professional social networks I still monitored, vague posts from current VeritySync engineers about database latency issues and unexplained API timeouts. Then came the more specific chatter. The client-facing compliance dashboard, Jared's streamlined pride and joy, began failing to load for users in the EU. It wasn't crashing. It was just an endless spinning loading icon, a ghost of a system. Then the jurisdiction logic that was supposed to automatically apply the correct regional data handling protocols began to misfire. Contracts were being populated with incorrect clauses. Permissions were being assigned based on Californian law to clients in Bavaria. The official client complaint, when it came, was a masterpiece of controlled fury. The Parisian firm sent a formal notice of breach. VeritySync's system had automatically and incorrectly confirmed that their customer data was being processed under a licensing agreement that was explicitly forbidden by the General Data Protection Regulation. It was a $1 million mistake triggered by a single line of faulty code, a line that had replaced a dozen safeguards I had built. It was the material breach I had warned Zoe about. The panic inside VeritySync must have been electric. I could almost feel the vibrations from my apartment. That night, I received a notification from my secure messaging app, an anonymous user ID. I already knew who it was. The message was short, stripped of all pleasantries. They're blaming a server migration. No one can find the original architecture files. I looked in the deep archive. Everything is gone. Jared said the old version is no longer valid and was decommissioned. Harper, do you still have the original fallback schema? I read the message, a wave of cold satisfaction washing over me. They were lost in a house they thought they owned. They were trying to read the blueprints, but the architect was gone, and the only remaining copies were forgeries. I typed my reply, 2 short sentences. It still exists, but not where they're looking. I hit send. Let them scramble. Let them sweat under the hot lights of their own incompetence. The hole was getting deeper, and soon, they would ask the man who dug it for a ladder. The signal of their escalating panic came in the form of a mandatory, company-wide meeting invitation. The subject line was a lie wrapped in corporate platitudes. System Harmony Initiative, addressing minor issues. I knew what that meant. It wasn't about harmony. It was about damage control. Minor issues was code for a 5-alarm fire they couldn't extinguish. Not everyone was panicking. Some of us knew this was coming. I didn't have a link to the live stream, of course, but Zoe sent me a single text message just as it was starting. He's about to present. I could picture the scene perfectly. The sterile, cavernous auditorium on the 15th floor, the nervous energy of the employees, the forced smiles on the faces of the senior leadership in the front row. And then there was Jared, striding onto the stage, a PowerPoint remote in his hand like a scepter. From what Zoe described in a few terse messages, he was at his most odious. He clicked through slides filled with upward trending arrows and meaningless buzzwords. He spoke of a new, agile VeritySync, unburdened by the legacy-era complexities of the past. He celebrated his streamlined compliance architecture, a system so intuitive and simplified that it had, in his words, removed the unnecessary legal barriers to innovation. He was taking a victory lap on the deck of the Titanic. He was a fool, performing for an audience of bigger fools. He finished his presentation with a confident smile, opening the floor to questions. There was a moment of soft, shuffling silence, and then a hand went up in the front row. It was Maria, the head of the legal department, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had never liked Jared's shortcuts. "Jared," she began, her voice cutting through the room's stale air. "This is all very impressive, but can you walk me through the fallback jurisdiction protocols for clients in the DACH and LAM regions under the new system, specifically? What happens in the event of a primary server failure during a data transfer?" It was a kill shot, a beautifully precise question aimed at the very heart of the vulnerability. There was no fallback protocol. There was nothing. I knew it. And now, Maria was asking Jared to prove it. Zoe's text came a second later. "He's stalling." I could see him, the confident smile faltering, the eyes darting to the side as he searched his memory for an answer that didn't exist. He would have mumbled something about dynamic routing or cloud-based redundancy, more empty phrases from his lexicon of lies. He couldn't answer because he had deleted the answer. Before he could fully implode, another voice, clear and steady, spoke up. "Excuse me, Maria, I might have something that can help." It was Zoe. She was standing in the middle of the auditorium, her laptop in her hands, all heads turned. She was just a junior contract coordinator. She wasn't supposed to have a voice in this room. "Jared," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "May I share my screen? I have an archival file that might be relevant." Confused, and likely seeing a potential escape, Jared nodded. "Of course, Zoe. Be proactive." The feed on the massive screen behind him switched from his branded PowerPoint slide to a simple file directory, and then she opened the file. Its name appeared at the top of the screen, stark and damning. Schema vCore Harper Final V3, off-grid. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. It wasn't a presentation, it was the system's soul, raw schema logic, complex data flows, and detailed annotations filled the screen. Zoe scrolled down, revealing the timestamp of its last update, the complete, unredacted audit trail of its implementation, and the intricate, multi-layered fallback conditions for every jurisdiction VeritySync operated in. Then, she stopped scrolling. At the bottom of the code, in the authoring block, was a single line of text that had been erased from every live system in the company, but which glowed now like a branding iron in the silent room. Authored by H. Lang. The auditorium was utterly silent. The only sound was the low hum of the projector fan, displaying my name in crisp, white letters against the dark background of the code. Zoe didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply moved her cursor with methodical precision. She highlighted the exact protocols Maria had asked about, the doc and lamb fallbacks, their logic intricate and robust. Then, she scrolled to a different part of the file, a section labeled Change History. This was the system's immutable diary. Every significant modification was logged, time-stamped, and digitally signed by the user who made it. The final entry under my name, Lang, read, Schema V3 approved and passed final audit. The timestamp was from 2 months prior. Then, Zoe moved the cursor down one line. A new entry appeared, one that did not exist in Jared's streamlined version. It was an entry from the deep system log, the one that couldn't be scrubbed from the surface. The user ID was J. Benson. The command executed was brutally simple. Delete module fallback series EU APAC. The timestamp was dated 3 days after I had received his 2:17 a.m. email. It wasn't an accusation, it was a receipt. Maria from legal was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. For the record, she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Schema V3, authored by Ms. Lang, was the last version of the compliance architecture to be fully reviewed and passed by the legal department. We were never made aware of any subsequent deletions or modifications. She had just turned Jared's action from a mistake into a deliberate, unauthorized act of corporate sabotage. The CEO, a silver-haired man named Sterling who had remained impassive until now, slowly turned his head. He didn't look at Jared. He looked at his senior leadership team, one by one. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, but it carried the chilling weight of absolute authority. Why, he asked the room, was the architect of our entire compliance system not consulted on these changes? The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was thick with guilt and cowardice. No one answered. They stared at the floor, at their notebooks, anywhere but at the CEO or the man on the stage. They had all seen Jared's ambition, his recklessness. They had all stayed quiet. Why? Sterling repeated, his voice dropping even lower. Was she fired? This time, the question hung in the air, a death sentence. All eyes finally, inevitably, drifted to the stage, to Jared. The color had completely drained from his face. He was a statue carved from chalk. The smug confidence he had worn like a shield was gone, shattered into a million pieces. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. A dry, pathetic clicking noise. He was a king stripped bare in front of his court, exposed as a fraud by a ghost. I wasn't in the room. I was miles away, in my apartment, looking out at the city, but I was there. My name was in every line of code on that screen. My logic was the foundation they had just discovered was missing. My integrity was the standard against which they were all being judged and found wanting. I hadn't crashed their system. I hadn't planted a virus or launched an attack. I had simply built it correctly in the first place. with a memory that could not be erased. I just turned on the lights, and they were watching it fall apart all by themselves. The chaos that followed the meeting was, I'm told, a sight to behold. A company built on the illusion of seamless control descended into frantic, headless panic. The order came down directly from Sterling: restore the old system. Now. But it was like asking a group of people who had only ever driven an automatic to suddenly rebuild a manual transmission from scratch. They had the parts, but they had no idea how they fit together. They were clicking buttons, running queries, and digging through archives, but they were lost. The architecture was mine. The language was mine. They were strangers in their own house. Jared Benson was escorted from the building by security less than an hour later. The official memo, sent out at 4:30 p.m., stated he was temporarily suspended, pending the results of an internal investigation. Everyone knew what that meant. He was a ghost now, too, but of a different sort. His erasure would be quick, quiet, and total. My phone began to light up. First, it was emails from HR, a sudden and comical reversal of their previous automated indifference. They were formal, awkward requests to discuss my employment status. I deleted them. Then came a voicemail from Maria in legal. Her tone stripped of its usual authority, replaced by something bordering on pleading. I let it go to voicemail. The call I finally answered came late in the evening. It was from the chief technology officer, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Harper," he said, his voice strained. "We can't parse the V3 architecture, the mirrored subsystem. It's not responding to our standard protocols. We need your version. No one else can read this." I listened, letting the silence stretch. In the background, I could hear the panicked murmur of other voices. He was in a war room. They had been trying for hours. They had failed. He had not called to offer me my job back. He had called to beg me to do it for them. "The system is a reflection of its architect, Thomas," I said, my voice calm. "You can't read it because you didn't write it, and the man you put in charge of it thought it was a toy." "Please, Harper," he said, the desperation raw. "Sterling is asking for you. He wants to meet. First thing in the morning. Name your price. We just need to get the system stable." I looked at my own screen. Through my Ghost account, I had already initiated the restoration protocol an hour ago. From my apartment, miles away, I was rebuilding their company while they were still trying to figure out how to open the toolbox. The primary systems were already syncing with the off-grid master copy. The compliance dashboard was flickering back to life in Europe. The jurisdictional logic was reasserting control. "A meeting won't be necessary," I said, and hung up. I opened a new email. I addressed it to Sterling, the CTO, and the entire executive board. I attached a single, clean file, the complete implementation and maintenance documentation for Schema V3. And then, I wrote 2 lines in the body. "Schema V3 restored. Documentation attached. You never needed me until you did." I hit send. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And to help this story reach more listeners, hit that hype button. Your support means the world.